Hey folks, you're going to get a sense of deja vu here in this video. You're thinking, here, I seen some of this yesterday. Well, you did. I got a few things wrong in the video. I accidentally uploaded an earlier version and I didn't even include the stuff I did on Spread. So I've re-edited this. It is largely different overall. There is some aspects the same, but at least half the video is different. So you're about to hear that SMK introduction once again. Hey folks, SMK Gaming here. We are all aware of the SMG meta that is in Battlefield 2042 right now. They are outdoing all the assault rifles at range. But why this change from the beta? What has happened? Many are speculating on the reasons for this without giving any actual insight into it. Today, that is what I am aiming to do. I recorded all the recoil patterns of all the fully automatic weapons from the beta. Today we are going to compare those with what we got in the full release to better determine what has actually changed. Now of course there's going to be LMGs and whatnot. I'm not going to be comparing those. The big talking point at this minute is assault rifles versus SMGs, and we're going to focus on the two assault rifles, the M5A3 and the AK-24, as well as the two SMGs, the Vector and the PBX-45. For the comparison, all attachments that were used in the beta were the same ones used in the full release, mostly the factory attachments. The only thing that was different between some of them was the sights. Sometimes they used a hollow sight compared to maybe an iron sight. So let's get into this comparison. The two images along the top of the screen here is the M5A3. To the left is the full release, to the right is the beta. Underneath is the AK-24 recoil patterns. Once again, to the left is the full release, what we got and what we have right now, and then to the right is the AK-24 that we got in the beta. I would firstly like to draw your attention to the number of panels that the recoil patterns are on. There is 3 in every single image. Looking at the M5A3 recoil patterns first, you can see that the overall vertical recoil remains largely the same between the full release and the beta version. However, that's the only thing that is similar. If I put red lines here on the beta version, you can see that the deviation from the first bullet to the end bullet remains largely the same. You know, so horizontal recoil was very similar between all patterns. If I am to do the same then on the full release, you can see that this varies greatly, and not only that, but the maximum horizontal recoil seems to be much greater. This is perfectly highlighted in the 5th and final recoil pattern that I did for the full release version. Now moving on to the AK-24, this is the part that is going to change from those that seen the video yesterday. If you look at the AK-24 in the beta, you can see the recoil went up 2 full panels. If you now look at full release, it went up 1.5 panels, so they have clearly reduced the vertical recoil. What about the horizontal recoil? Well, I can't tell any distinguishable difference between the beta and the full release. I've done the lines myself and they look very similar. So what can we tell between these full release and beta versions? Well, the M5 got a nerf and the AK got a buff, and you can clearly tell why. If you look at the beta version of the M5 and then the beta version of the AK had double the vertical recoil of the M5. There was absolutely no reason to use it over the M5. Everyone used the M5 in the beta. So they obviously wanted to balance that out, so they've given a bit of a nerf to the M5 and they've buffed the AK a little bit as well. Moving on to the two SMGs now, the Vector up first. You can see in the comparison between the full release and the beta, overall vertical recoil has been reduced, as well as the spread. The spread here is probably the biggest one, as that is why it likely feels like these guns are more of a laser compared to the assault rifles. Moving on to the PBX-45, well, so once again this is where things differ from the video I had out the other day. If you look at the beta version, you can see a couple of the bullets are a little bit below the line, and they also go above the other line, so they're a tiny bit more than 1 full panel. If you look at the full release and the vertical recoil patterns, they all are pretty much on the line, and then only one of them goes slightly above it. It looks to me like the vertical recoil has been reduced the tiniest amount, not as much as the Vector, but it has been reduced ever so slightly. Horizontal recoil looks to be unchanged. So overall, it appears that the SMGs, or these two SMGs, got a little bit of a buff from the beta. But before we finalise and make any decisions here, let's see what the bloom, the spread, the big talking point people have been talking about, and let's compare them properly by trying to control the recoil and seeing what the bloom is at various distances. Here is going to be 8 meters, and then I'll also test it at a greater distance of 25 meters. I cannot compare the bloom and spread with these weapons with the beta versions because I didn't record this in the beta version. However, we will look at other weapons in addition to the ones we've been testing so far also. Here's the bloom and spread of the 4 weapons we've been testing so far at 8 meters. At this distance, all these here weapons would be hitting their target. No problem whatsoever because you're that close. You can see the PBX and the Vector. They are a little bit smaller, but as I said, at this distance, it doesn't make any difference. But at this point, we're going to add in another SMG, the meta gun on Battlefield 2042, the PP29. As you can clearly see, it's a very small spread pattern, quite like the PBX, but more testing is required. Let's now move the distance out to 25 meters, more than double of what we currently had there at 8 meters. So here we have the same 4 weapons once again, the 2 assault rifles along the top. And the assault rifles, they look quite similar to one another. Down the bottom right hand corner is the Vector. Now, at this distance, 25 meters, this is what you would expect the spread of an SMG to look like. But then you move across to the PBX, another SMG weapon, and look how tight its bullets are, look how tight its spread and bloom is in comparison to the 2 assault rifles above. Now let's add in the meta weapon, the PP29. Now remember, as you are looking at this, in each one of those spread patterns, there is 64 bullets within the factory magazine, more than double the capacity of the factory magazines of the assault rifles I tested above. Look how close and compact that is for 25 meters. Any wonder it's the meta gun in Battlefield 2042 right now. Looking at all this testing as a whole, when you look at the recoil patterns and now the spread patterns, and the fact that the SMGs got slight buffs from the beta, whereas the assault rifles largely got nerfed. I know the AK did get a slight buff to its recoil, which is less. However, I then suspect the spread was increased on both of those rifles also. From the beta, I couldn't test it, but it's just my suspicion. All this has resulted in this SMG meta in Battlefield 2042, which is very strange considering these Battlefield 2042 maps are the biggest maps we've ever had, and SMGs are meant for close quarter combat, yet they're outdoing these assault rifles at range. This doesn't add up, something is wrong here. DICE have thankfully recognised this, and they are changing up things. The assault rifles are having their spread reduced when firing when stationary and when firing when moving around. The PP is getting its vertical recoil increased. There's a ton of other changes coming along, folks. They put out patch notes last night and it's very detailed. We're getting 2 more patches before Christmas. Until DICE look into this and get this here changed, I wouldn't recommend ever using an assault rifle right now. SMGs outdo them at distance, even though their damage output might be less than assault rifles. Because their spread is far less compared to the assault rifles, they will feel much more accurate at distance. I hope you enjoyed this one here, folks, and what I've shown you today gives you a bit more insight rather than just hearing people talk about it. Hopefully showing you this a bit more visually helps with your understanding of what's going on in the game right now. Of course, if you enjoyed it, you found it useful, please hit that subscribe button, like up the video, drop a comment, it helps me out greatly. Thank you for watching, stay safe out there, and I'll catch you again in the next one.